More trouble for Justin Trudeau and his Liberal Party. He's seeing a huge dive in popularity among younger voters in that 18 to 29 year category. And remember, younger voters typically a core part of the Liberal base. This is all according to some new polling numbers coming out from Nanos Research today. This was from the end of August, right now. And take a look. The Conservatives way ahead of the Liberals by more than twice the numbers. The Conservatives at 39.2, the NDP at 30.9, and the Liberals, wow, hemorrhaging support at 15.9%. Now, we have seen a dramatic shift just this month alone. Take a look at where the numbers were earlier this month, the beginning of August. The Conservatives were at 29.3, the Liberals at 26.8. So the Conservatives have jumped way up by 10 points, and the Liberals have dropped down by 10 points. The big issue, of course, economic ones, housing, affordability, the cost of living. Let's bring in Lori Turnbull, political analyst, for more on this. Lori, your reaction to these awful numbers for the Liberals?
As you said, Todd, this is typically a base of support for the Liberals. When Justin Trudeau became Prime Minister in 2015, we could see a big surge in support for him, for the Liberals, from that kind of younger voter demographic, and for particular reasons, right? Because Justin Trudeau was talking about things that younger voters had indicated they care about, and things like reconciliation, things like changing the electoral system, making the politics more transparent. He campaigned on doing things differently. And so now you can see, at the 8-year mark, those voters, many people have moved out of that demographic and are now in a different age category, but you can see that kind of younger voter base that he typically could count on for support is moving toward Pierre Poilievre and the Conservatives, as well as the NDP and Jagmeet Singh. Now, how that's actually going to shake out, if it shakes out in the next election, because of course, there's a lot of heterogeneity in that base, right? Like every young voter is not going to look at things the same way, but we can see the opposition parties gaining traction on the housing crisis, on the climate crisis, on things that, again, young voters are really thinking about, and it seems that the Liberals are coming up short on those things.
Yeah, what I find really surprising is the surge in support for the Conservatives, because again, as you know, as a political analyst, that's typically not what we see with younger voters. But Pierre Poilievre has been hammering throughout the summer the issue of the affordability crisis, whether it's housing, cost of living, inflation, and perhaps the Prime Minister has not been able to do that. Well, clearly, if you look at these numbers, he hasn't been able to do that in the same kind of way. So even if people are not natural conservatives, when you're talking about pocketbook issues, they start to become ones to a certain extent, Lori.
And it's interesting because we can see this support among younger voters building for Pierre Poilievre and the Conservatives since September of last year. I mean, at least since then. So this is not just a response to, summertime politics and things are a little bit low key. And Pierre Poilievre has put out these new commercials that, that he's being described in his wife's voice. Like that stuff is showing that it's working, but that's not the whole story here. There is a longer term shift in those younger voters. And I think, Pierre Poilievre is talking about the affordability crisis. He's talking directly to young people who are caught in this crunch of you're still paying off your student debt. You're afraid you're not going to be able to pay your mortgage. You may not have a mortgage. You may not have a place to live, even though you're working hard and doing everything right. He is kind of speaking directly to that anxiety. And so I think, not only are we seeing a shift in those voters, we're seeing a shift in how people do politics. We say, typically, young voters tend not to be conservative. Pierre Poilievre never talks about being a conservative. He talks about how he wants to be Prime Minister. He talks about he wants to find you, he wants to relieve you from your anxiety. He wants to find you a place to live. He wants your taxes to be lower. He wants your life to be better. So he's sort of harnessing, I think, that anxiety that we can see across age groups, but is definitely really hitting home in those younger voters. And, we're seeing, I think, again, like a very different way of doing politics now, where we're not necessarily just appealing on the basis of party, not at all. You see leaders really trying to make a direct connection with voters. And so I think that's what Pierre Poilievre is trying to do.
We're just showing the numbers. And what I'm also surprised at is that, the support has not gone more for the NDP, which, again, is typically a place where a lot of younger voters find themselves represented and like the policies of the NDP. That may be partially, a comment on the leadership of Jagmeet Singh, or just that some voters may realize that in all likelihood it's going to be either a Liberal or a Conservative government, in all likelihood not an NDP government. You never know. Here's the other thing I'm curious about is for Justin Trudeau, the issue of voter fatigue. So it's not so much anything in particular about him. People are just kind of tired of him because he's been around for 8 years.
Sure. And voter fatigue is very difficult, I think, for a leader or a government to overcome because it sort of accumulates over time. It's not one specific thing. It's just you've been there a while and you've accumulated some baggage and people are blaming you for things, rightly, wrongly, whatever. You're the government. And there's only so much political capital, I think, that anybody has, even Justin Trudeau, who seemed to ride in 2015 with, limitless political capital, but nobody has limitless. And so he's been leader of the party for over 10 years. He's been prime minister for almost 8 years. And there's going to be a natural looking around at a certain point. And I think we can see, too, this is an unusual time of anxiety for many voters. We are in an unusual economic climate. We are in an unusual programs in question, healthcare, long-term care. What are we going to do with dental and pharmaceutical when we add that weight on top of it? There's so many questions that people have. So I think that even compounds the effect of voter fatigue now.
Yeah, one last thing has to do with the timeline here. We know that an election doesn't have to be called until 2025. So certainly the Liberals have a long time to try and turn these poll numbers around. But, if you're talking about young people, I know they've also got an issue with women, suburban women who are leaving the Liberals, going to the NDP, or again, the Conservatives more likely, and also problems with male voters as well. So there's a lot of challenges here for the Liberals, although they have a big chunk of time to do it. I mean, we're only in August of 2023, Lori.
It's true. And you might ask whether the long timeline is a good thing or a bad thing. Mm-hmm. I mean, you can imagine over a period of time, it's not necessarily that things would get better for them. It's possible that it could get worse. And so there's always this sort of, how do you kind of anticipate some of those variables that you won't necessarily see coming? I think this is why we saw the Liberals make the kinds of decisions with the cabinet shuffle that they did. It was really about shoring up what they already have and seeing maybe if they can build on that. Because I think they are worried that places like Atlantic Canada, places like Toronto, places like Quebec, it's not looking like safe, as safe ground for them anymore. And so I think they're really kind of coming back and trying to enforce and reinforce what have been typical strongholds for them. And we can see that in those younger voters, which was typically a stronghold, that's not happening right now.
Lori Turnbull joining us, political analyst in Ottawa. Good to see you, Lori. Thanks for this.
Good to see you too. Take care.
And a programming note, our flagship political affairs program, Power Play with Vashi Kapelos, returns next week, Tuesday, September the 5th, right here on CTV News Channel, 5 o'clock Eastern, 2 Pacific, and you can watch it as well at ctvnews.ca.